Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, welcome back to another Destiny video. And in today's video, we are once again back speaking about the Age of Triumph. Of course, Bungie just had their second live stream, and today's focus was weekly rituals, basically what we'll be doing on a weekly basis once Age of Triumph drops, starting on March 28th. Of course, that includes things like the raids, Prison of Elders, strikes, nightfalls, Crucible, story missions, some of the rewards, some stuff tied into S-ATAIII, all that stuff like that. So there is actually a fair bit of stuff to talk about. So what I'm going to do is condense it down into 5 things you guys need to know about Age of Triumph. So if you do enjoy this, you do find it helpful, then a like would be super appreciated. Comment down below if you have any questions. But let's get started. First up, coming in at number 1, the beginning of Age of Triumph. This whole event, the final live event for Destiny before Destiny 2, is going to commence with a quest from the speaker. Basically, on March 28th, when the update goes live, you'll load in and you'll have a quest from the speaker. You'll go and speak to him. And this quest is made up of around 12 steps, they said, give or take. And the idea is it'll basically funnel you through the new weekly activities, some of the stuff you'll be doing, and effectively kind of take you through the Destiny experience one last time. So sort of like a celebratory sort of round trip, so to speak, or a sort of encore, if you will. Basically a means to get you to kind of jump back into most of the activities to experience various different aspects of the game. So the very first one will actually have you complete story missions in the featured weekly story playlist, which I'll speak about in a moment. But of course, after that, it'll then go through things like Crucible, strikes, nightfalls, Prison of Elders, most likely the raid, but they didn't actually specify all the different steps, so they may well omit that in consideration of the fact that not everyone does raids. But either way, the idea behind this questline is just to get most people to kind of run through one last time the sort of flow of Destiny, experiencing all the different types of content, getting rewards in the process. So that is how it begins. On March 28th, the speaker will have a quest for you. Moving on to number 2, S-ATAIII, and of course, Eververse. I appreciate this is not always everyone's favourite thing, especially when you consider that most of this stuff, in fact all of this stuff, is not coming over to Destiny 2. That includes any silver you might have left. However, the way they are handling it this time around is of course a lot better than before. There are actually 3 sources of this kind of new loot box per week. And of course that means for any of you guys that don't want to spend money, then you have plenty of opportunities to get this stuff. But basically, in S-ATAIII, there's going to be a brand new box. This is going to be called the Treasure of Ages. This is going to replace things like the Treasure of the Dawning, or the Radiant Treasure, things like that. And the Treasure of the Ages is actually a kind of big collection box that contains everything that the live team has ever created. So think back to the Desolate gear, the Spectre gear, the Dawning gear, some of the kind of Chroma gear, as well as, say, special shaders from Sparrow Racing League events, emblems, ships, sparrows, effectively everything that has ever been part of a live event. So think back to Dawning, Halloween events, anything like that. If you've missed any of it, then you will actually be able to get those items, or have a chance to get those items, from these new boxes. So it's basically like a massive bumper box that contains everything that's ever been made as part of a live event. So if you are a collector out there, or maybe you kind of dismantled something, you lost something, or there's something you just never quite managed to get before an event finished, this is now your chance. That also means that places where you would previously get Treasures of the Dawning or Radiant Treasures, you will now for the most part get a Treasure of the Ages. So it'll basically all be consolidated into this one box. However, there are also new items too, because of course the way these boxes work, you'll get something from the left, something from the middle, and of course on the right hand side is the brand new stuff. Every class will of course have a dedicated Age of Triumph armor set. They haven't actually shown what that looks like just yet, but they will be showing that next week. But on top of that, there are also some brand new weapon ornaments, and one of these actually confirms a question I had last week with regards to another returning exotic. Necrochasm is indeed coming back at 390 light, but there are ornaments for Necrochasm, Vex Mythoclast, Touch of Malice, No Land Beyond, Dragon's Breath, Suros Regime, and Lord of Wolves. So effectively a lot of the guns that kind of didn't have ornaments before are now being given some kind of love before Destiny wraps up. So again, more things to grab there. Plus there are also some ships and some shaders. However, for those of you guys that are after, say, a particular item and you don't necessarily want to deal with the massive random nature of a huge treasure box, they've also updated the Silver Dust store. So don't forget that any of these things that you can kind of dismantle, so whether that be Age of Triumph gear or ornaments or anything that kind of comes from these boxes, that'll of course convert into Silver Dust. But if you go over to the Silver Dust kiosk, you'll of course see there are now 5 different collections. These collections are of course the different seasons or the different events that we have been through. So again, if there is something particular you are after, and you have enough Silver Dust, then you can actually go here and specifically buy that item. So again, making it a little bit easier to grab some of the things you might have missed. But to call it out once more, just to make sure it's very clear, All of this stuff from Eververse is not going to carry over to Destiny 2, so the purpose behind this is, of course, just to kind of round out your Guardian for Year 1, make sure you sort of wrap it up and be like, you know what, this is the final event, the final kind of Guardian, this is what I look like now before I move over to Destiny 2. Of course, your character will come with you, but your gear will not. So I wouldn't necessarily advise buying any silver, because of course that silver will not carry over, but if you have any left, you might want to buy some treasures. You can, of course, buy the Treasure of the Ages if you want to kind of speed up the process. But again, you can also get these from the weekly activities, which we'll speak about in a moment. After that, I want to speak quickly about Lord Shaxx, number 3. He is now going to have 2 weekly bounties. So up until now, the weekly Crucible bounty is a source of Nightfall tier rewards, and there was, of course, 1 bounty. But now, they're adding in 2. They'll be focused around 6v6 activities. And of course, both of these list unknown rewards, which of course means it can be Nightfall tier rewards. They can be exotics, maybe it'll be a random ghost you don't want. But either way, more stuff to do on a weekly basis from Lord Shaxx. Now, they didn't state specifically whether this will just appear for everyone or whether it will still be tied to the Crucible quest chain. So obviously on March 28th, we'll find that out. But long story short, if it's not there, then you'll of course need to go back and revisit that Crucible quest chain. But either way, more stuff to do from Shaxx per week. Then moving over to number 4, weekly activities. So, of course, if you go to the director, you'll be familiar with this section on the map, or this section on the kind of page where you go for your weekly activities. In the game as it exists right now, you have Crucible, you have your daily story mission, your Siva Crisis Heroic Strike playlist, your Nightfall, and something else at the end that I actually can't remember, or maybe that's it. Either way, there's more stuff this time around. So, starting from the left, you have the weekly Crucible. Again, here, this is typically a 6v6 activity, but one of your rewards from here is a Treasure of the Ages, plus, of course, your Legendary Mocks. So that is Treasure of the Ages, loot box number 1. Next to that, you have the weekly story playlist. This will also reward you with another Treasure of the Ages, plus a total of 20 Legendary Marks times 5. Now, they've changed this because, as you guys know, right now, there is a daily story mission. You do that, you get your Legendary Marks. If you miss that day, you've missed those Legendary Marks. They've changed it now because it's now turned into a playlist, and that playlist is categorized by, say, planets. So, for example, the one they're running in this test environment right now is Mars and Venus, but they might have, say, Earth and Moon, House of Wolves, Dark Below, Taken King. They'll effectively have, on a weekly basis, a group of story missions, and within that playlist, it will just cycle through every single mission. So you can jump in, and you can do it any way you want, but it also means that if you missed one day in the week, you haven't missed out on those Legendary Marks. You just simply need to do 5 missions within this playlist, and you'll get all of those. Coincidentally, it's also one of the first things you need to do from the Speaker's questline, so you'll definitely need to hit this up anyway, but also, to reiterate, another Treasure of the Ages. So right now, we are on 2. Moving over from there to the Siva Crisis Heroic Strike playlist, this is of course where you get your 3rd Treasure of the Ages, plus your usual 30 Legendary Marks if you do 3. This one hasn't changed too much, but of course they said it is a little bit more generous. But the main thing to bear in mind is through those first 3 activities, there are 3 Treasures of the Dawning to earn. So on a weekly basis, you can earn 3 of them. Of course, you can, as mentioned, buy more from Tess Everest if you want to. But if you want to get some stuff, then you know that on a weekly basis, you'll be able to get 3 as opposed to, say, 1 when you look back to things like Treasure of the Dawning or Radiant Treasures. So it's going to make it a little bit easier to get some of those items that you want. After that, you of course have the weekly Nightfall Strike. This is 380 light, but this one here has a Daybreak modifier. Now the Daybreak modifier will be live on the 28th of March, but it will not be live every single week. It's going to show up every 4 weeks to begin with, and the idea behind the Daybreak modifier is that it takes all of the epic modifiers from the Nightfall before, combines them into one, plus it gives you an increased recharge rate on your super, your melees, and your grenades. Basically, the Mayhem modifier from Crucible has been applied to the Nightfall, so you run in, it means you can spam your super, spam your grenades, spam your melees, it means it'll be a lot quicker to go through, which is of course going to be very handy, and I think the reason they probably did this as well is because the Age of Triumphs book is going to have us repeating activities, so Daybreak will just basically speed up the process, making it a little bit easier to go and repeat those strikes. So that will show up every 4 weeks. However, for those of you guys that end up kind of really enjoying this and actually wish it was a slightly more permanent thing, starting on July the 18th, running until the end of August for 6 weeks, there'll be a 6-week block where every single week there will be a Daybreak modifier on the Nightfall. I would imagine the reason they're probably going to do this, because if you look back to previous, say, Moments of Triumph books, there was actually a cut-off period, which was typically, you know, ahead of the launch of the next expansion. So I'm going to imagine the reason they're doing this until the end of August is because they'll basically give you those 6 weeks to kind of round out your book if you haven't completed anything. And of course, that means that by the end of August, that will then be the cutoff point. You can try and grab your t-shirt, and then if Destiny 2 ends up coming out in September, it'll then be kind of a 4-week countdown until launch, or something like that, you know, assuming it comes out at the end. Either way, it's probably no coincidence that that is why they're putting the 6-week block there. But for the time being, something to consider. Following on from there, to the right of that, you have Challenge of the Elders. This is a 390 Lite version. The conventional, currently existing Challenge of the Elders is still in the Reef node, but on the Director, there is a 390 version. This will, of course, reward you with a Legendary Engram, Legendary Marks, and, of course, just generally speaking, more generous loot. And finally, the last one we spoke about last week, the weekly featured raid. Whenever it comes up here, there will be all challenge modes active, plus your rewards are gear and the Age of Triumph ornament. So, that is your weekly activities. Then finally, in at number 5, Blue Flames are back. If you guys have been playing Destiny since the very beginning, you remember that back in the old days, when you completed the Nightfall, you actually got blue flames around your head, and this was a Nightfall buff that remained for an entire week. When you had this buff, you gained increased XP from all activities, which is of course great if you're kind of like leveling things up and whatnot. That is making a comeback. That is something that a lot of people really enjoyed, and they kind of wanted to make a return. So, as of the 28th of March, when Age of Triumph deploys, when you do a Nightfall on a weekly basis, you'll get the blue flames around your head, and that will remain for a week, and it'll give you increased XP. So, of course, super useful if you're still going to be going through trying to complete things for the Age of Triumph's book. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. You can now colour Twilight Garrison as well. Pretty cool. And that, my friends, is pretty much it. That is everything that was covered in the Age of Triumph livestream number 2. Next week's focus is on gear and some of the kind of ornaments, the raid weapons, the sort of the returning gear, all that stuff like that. So do stay tuned for that. I will, of course, have a breakdown for that if you guys miss it. But for the time being, that is everything. If you missed last week's stream and you want to recap, then I'll also link that down below. But for the time being, thank you for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Peace out.